What if the most powerful weapon against manipulation isn't force, but a woman's virtue? Could quiet righteousness be the very light that unravels even the deepest deception? What if God's answer to narcissistic control is not louder rage, but unwavering holiness? In a world dominated by noise, performance, and power games, there exists a kind of strength that cannot be mimicked, a force that isn't loud, but undeniable. It's not revenge, it's not fury, it's not even confrontation. It's a virtue born of fire, refined in trials, and anchored in God. It is the quiet holiness of a woman who has been broken, healed, and rebuilt by grace. When faced with narcissistic abuse, manipulation, gaslighting, control, the world tells her to fight back louder. But heaven offers her something greater: clarity, authority, peace. The kind that doesn't argue, it reveals. This is the power of a virtuous woman. And when she stands in that power, rooted in righteousness, the illusion begins to collapse. This message is not about her aggression, but her transformation. Not about vengeance, but visibility. Because when she finally sees and chooses not to play the game, something spiritual happens. The empire of lies begins to shake, not from rage, but from revelation. And in that silence, a narcissist's unraveling begins. The quiet power they never saw coming there is a kind of strength that doesn't shout, a kind of holiness that doesn't beg to be noticed. It walks into a room and unsettles every spirit that doesn't belong there. It is not the strength of revenge or bitterness or even logic. It is the strength of righteousness, a strength rooted in God, not in ego, and the world has never known a more powerful force against evil than a virtuous woman in the war against narcissistic abuse. Where manipulation, control, and deceit run rampant, many ask, what breaks a narcissist? What force can undo someone who thrives on power and illusions? The answer is not louder rage, it is not revenge, it is not sinking to their level. It is the presence of a woman whose soul cannot be corrupted. Because a narcissist survives on illusion, they dominate through lies, charm, chaos, and control. But when they come face to face with a woman who is tethered to heaven, who walks with purity, and who has been through the fire but carries no smoke, their illusions begin to tremble, and eventually they collapse. This is her story. This is your story. And this is why only a virtuous woman, not a loud one, not a broken one, not a fearful one, can destroy a narcissist empire of falsehoods. Not with weapons, but with unwavering truth. Let's walk through the 7 reasons why her virtue exposes their darkness. A narcissist thrives in shadows. They operate in environments where truth is blurred, where emotion can be twisted, and where people are unsure of their own footing. They don't fear confrontation. They welcome it because confrontation can be redirected. They don't fear exposure. They deflect it. What a narcissist fears more than anything is clarity, and there is no clearer threat to their existence than a woman who walks in virtue, a woman grounded in truth, stable in her spirit, and immune to the seductive fog of confusion they constantly create. To understand this dynamic, we must first recognize that narcissism isn't merely a personality flaw. It is a spiritual sickness that depends on manipulation to survive. It feeds on false narratives, thrives in emotional chaos, and survives by making others question their own reality. A narcissist cannot function around people who know who they are, who see through deception, and who do not need external validation to feel secure. That is exactly what a virtuous woman represents. She is the opposite of everything. The narcissist depends on her virtue isn't just a set of moral behaviors. It's a force, a spiritual weight, a radiant clarity that interrupts the atmosphere of control and disorder. And the narcissist doesn't just sense it. They are deeply disturbed by it. She doesn't need to preach, prove, or perform. Her peace unsettles them. Her refusal to argue when provoked enrages them. Her ability to set boundaries without bitterness disarms them to most people. She seems calm, but to the narcissist, she is dangerous because every time she refuses to be pulled into their dysfunction, every time she remains unmoved in the face of manipulation, every time she responds with quiet strength instead of emotional chaos, she is exposing them not with words, with contrast, and that contrast burns. You see, a narcissist lives in illusion. They construct identities that aren't real. They depend on admiration. They don't deserve. They mirror others to survive, pretending to be who you need them to be until they no longer need you. Their world is built on sand, and they know it. That's why they target people who are vulnerable, uncertain, or desperate for love. But when they encounter a woman who has spent time alone with God, who knows what love is because she receives it from the source, who has endured suffering without letting it make her hard, they are confronted with something they can't imitate: authenticity. She doesn't shift based on who's in the room. She doesn't crave approval. She doesn't give power to words that are meant to wound. Her discernment cannot be turned off. Her convictions are not for sale. And most importantly, she is not afraid to be alone. That last part is critical. Narcissists use abandonment as a weapon. They withdraw affection to create panic. But the virtuous woman has already walked through lonely valleys. She has already learned to survive in silence. Her identity isn't tied to presence or absence. It's tied to truth. That is what makes her untouchable. And here's where the unraveling begins. The narcissist realizes that she sees through him, and he cannot control what she sees, no matter how he performs, no matter what mask he puts on. She's not fooled, and he knows it. And the knowledge that she has perceived the truth, that she sees the distortion, that she does not tremble under his emotional weight, begins to rot the false world he's built around himself. Because the only way his deception holds power is if you agree to believe it. But she doesn't. She sees him clearly, fully, spiritually, and she walks away unscathed. This is not about revenge. She isn't trying to break him. She simply refuses to bow. And that refusal is more devastating than any act of aggression, because narcissists expect to be fought. They are prepared for rage, retaliation, even hatred. But they are not prepared for detachment. They are not prepared for a woman who no longer plays their game, who doesn't need their validation, who doesn't fear their rejection, and who no longer takes the bait. That's when the control begins to slip. That's when their world begins to implode. The virtuous woman doesn't fight for attention. She doesn't beg to be understood. She doesn't plead with him to change. She simply stands. And in standing, she shines. And in shining, she reveals. And what is revealed is this: the narcissist has no real power, only borrowed power from those who did not yet know their worth. But she knows now, and when she knows, he loses. This is the beginning of spiritual judgment, not by screaming, not by exposing him to the world, but by letting the light of God within her reveal what he truly is. And that kind of exposure, that kind of confrontation, is not external. It's internal. It's inescapable, and it is permanent. So no, she does not destroy him with vengeance. She destroys him because she is no longer afraid of him, because she has become what he cannot become: whole. because her identity has been restored in Christ, and that is the one kind of woman a narcissist cannot use, cannot trap, cannot manipulate, and cannot forget. That is why her virtue is his undoing. 2. She refuses to play his game. One of the narcissist's most destructive weapons is the ability to control the rules of engagement. He doesn't operate within truth, so he bends reality until it suits him. He provokes with intention, lies with ease, and manipulates not to win an argument, but to own the emotional atmosphere. He wants to determine what matters, what hurts, and what is allowed to be spoken in this toxic framework. Every interaction becomes a trap, and every emotional response becomes a tether he uses to keep you close. But when a virtuous woman recognizes the game, when she refuses to participate, when she walks in discernment and no longer reacts the way he anticipates, his entire strategy collapses. He wants chaos. She gives silence. He wants confusion. She brings clarity. He wants control. She walks away. And it's not because she's cold or disconnected, it's because she finally sees. She sees the pattern. She sees the setup. She sees how he pokes to provoke, how he twists love into obligation, how he confuses guilt with responsibility. But now she no longer bites the hook. He creates drama. She doesn't rise to it. He accuses. She doesn't explain. He gaslights. She no longer doubts her mind. This isn't passive silence. It's spiritual warfare through restraint, because nothing frustrates a narcissist more than a woman who no longer responds. At first, he panics, then he escalates, he tries harder, louder, lies deeper, manipulation, more intense love bombing, or threats. He may shift personas, suddenly acting loving again, or turning others against her. But she does not budge, because she has learned the deepest. Truth of all, you don't win a rigged game by playing better. You win by refusing to play. At all, this refusal is not weakness. It's divine strength. It's the Spirit of God rising up inside her, teaching her that dignity does not need to scream to be powerful, that not every false accusation requires a rebuttal. The true strength is not always reactive. Sometimes it's walking away without needing closure. And that is what she does. He wanted her to collapse instead. She elevated. He wanted her begging. Instead, she became unbothered. He wanted her confused. Instead, she became rooted in the truth. The narcissist finds himself suddenly in a space he cannot control. The atmosphere no longer bends to him. The power dynamic has shifted. Why? Because she no longer depends on his behavior to determine her peace. She has been recalibrated not by the relationship, but by the Holy Spirit. And now his weapons don't work. The fire doesn't burn her. The guilt doesn't chain her. The drama doesn't move her. She has tapped into a different strength, a different logic, a different vision, one that he cannot enter. And that is why he begins to unravel. Because without her reactions, he has no script. Without her attention, he has no audience. Without her emotional availability, he has no supply. He didn't just lose control of her. He lost the mirror that validated his manipulation. And now he is alone with himself. And he doesn't know who that is. So while it may seem quiet on the surface, while others may not understand her detachment, her peace, her no contact, her boundaries, a war has already been won, not by fighting, but by stepping out of the game entirely and leaving the narcissist to fight with nothing but his own demons. If you've ever stopped reacting, stopped explaining, and simply chose peace over performance, comment below with the words, "I'm no longer playing." Let it be a declaration not of surrender, but of wisdom, strength, and spiritual maturity. And now we move into the heart of this journey, What happens when her presence begins to reflect the narcissist's true face back to himself, and there is nowhere left for him to hide. 3. She becomes a mirror. They can't escape the most painful thing a narcissist will ever encounter is not being called out. It's being seen, truly seen by someone. They cannot manipulate. A narcissist does not fear criticism. They weaponize it. They do not fear rejection. They control it. But what they do fear deeply and instinctively is being fully visible to someone whose eyes are clear, steady, and no longer looking for validation. That is the role a virtuous woman begins to play. She becomes a mirror, not because she is trying to expose, but because her existence, her peace, her purity, her unwavering clarity makes it impossible for the narcissist to maintain the illusion. He cannot twist her truth because she no longer needs his agreement to validate what she sees. He cannot distract her with drama because her emotional roots have grown too deep. He cannot distort the narrative because she's no longer a participant in his story. And when all those tactics fail, something terrifying begins to happen. He sees himself for most of his life. He's been able to avoid this through lies, projection, charm, and blame-shifting. The narcissist has managed to keep the mirror turned outward. Everyone else was the problem. Everyone else was too emotional, too sensitive, too difficult, too wrong. But now he's in the presence of someone who reflects. None of that. Her strength is quiet, but undeniable. Her gaze is not full of confusion, but certainty. Her love, once vulnerable to his manipulation, has now matured into boundaries and discernment, and without saying a word, she begins to show him what he truly is: insecure, manipulative, and empty. And emptiness hates reflection. At first, he denies it. He lashes out, accuses her of being judgmental, cold, or too perfect. Then he tries to regain control, love-bombing, apologizing, even quoting scripture if needed, hoping to draw her back into the fog. But it doesn't work because she's not acting out of pride. She's acting out of truth, and truth does not negotiate with delusion. This moment, the moment when the narcissist realizes he is no longer hidden, no longer able to project, no longer able to dominate, is the beginning of his unraveling. Because her eyes don't blink. She doesn't argue anymore. She simply watches. She simply walks in wholeness. She simply lives in a way that contradicts every justification he ever clung to. And it is unbearable, you see. There is a different kind of judgment that happens when someone refuses to fight you, but also refuses to yield. When someone simply stands unbroken, untouched, and unimpressed. By your games, you begin to collapse under your own weight. That's what the narcissist experiences in her presence. Her righteousness becomes a judgment in itself. Not loud, not punitive, but relentless. She's not trying to hurt him. She's not trying to prove anything. She's just not broken anymore. And that is the part he can't tolerate. Because narcissists don't just want admiration. They want to believe they are more powerful than your healing. And when she heals without him, beyond him, and far away from his control, he starts to feel what he has inflicted on others: powerlessness. And here's the core truth: the narcissist is not truly afraid of her. He's afraid of the reflection she gives him. He's afraid that she's telling the truth. Even in her silence, he's afraid that she sees the part of himself he has spent a lifetime hiding, not just from others, but from his own mind. And when someone holds a mirror, you cannot break, cannot smear, cannot replace, you begin to fall apart. That's what her presence does. It begins the breakdown, and now we enter the next stage of the collapse. What happens when she walks away? Not in anger, not in revenge, but in peace. and how that divine silence becomes the most devastating judgment of all. Bore her departure becomes divine judgment when a narcissist loses control of the narrative, when their illusions begin to break, when the mirror they can't shatter stands firm in front of them. There is only one path left, the exit of the woman they never thought would leave. And it's in that moment, the moment she walks away. Not in hatred, not in a storm of screaming, but in silence and clarity, that he realizes something far more terrifying than abandonment. He realizes he has lost something holy, because a narcissist does not value people for who they are. They value people for what they can extract from them. And the virtuous woman offered something he couldn't name, but he felt it. She brought peace into his chaos. She brought patience into his immaturity. She brought structure to his confusion. And though he never respected it, he relied on it more than he knew she was the unseen order holding up his collapsing world. And when she finally left, not with a bang, but with the calm assurance that God was calling her out, he felt the tremor the narcissist expected her to beg. He expected her to cry. He expected her to break. But when she left with her dignity intact, without needing him to acknowledge her worth, without needing him to apologize, something inside him ruptured, because narcissists aren't devastated when you hate them. They're devastated when you no longer care. They aren't undone by your rage. They are undone by your peace. That's the judgment, not fire from heaven, not public exposure, but the loss of access, the loss of light. Because when a virtuous woman walks away, she takes with her the atmosphere. She brought the protection, the softness, the clarity, the love, the forgiveness, the truth. She was the presence of grace in a house of manipulation. And now that grace is gone, and he knows he will not find it again, he will try. He will find replacements. He will imitate connection. He will love bomb new supply. But none of it will feel like her, because she wasn't just a woman. She was a covering, and that covering was from God. And what he mocked, he now misses. What he dismissed, he now desires. But it's too late. Because grace, when trampled, doesn't always stay. And sometimes the most righteous judgment God issues over a narcissist's life is letting her leave without ever looking back. This is what makes her departure so severe. It's not angry. It's not vengeful. It's holy. It is the quiet, decisive shift of heaven saying, "Enough, she's done." And now, the narcissist sits in the echo of his own emptiness, left to face what he was without her. And worse, to realize that who she was never belonged to him in the first place. This is divine justice. Because while the world may not know what happened behind closed doors, while he may still tell his version to those who will listen, he knows God knows. And most of all, she knows. And that knowledge is no longer something he can access or control. It lives in her spirit. Now, not as trauma, but as testimony. The judgment was never her revenge. It was her absence, because she was the last light in a collapsing world. And when the light left, the darkness remained and swallowed itself whole. And now, we transition to a higher realm, where God himself steps in, not to assist her retaliation, but to defend her cause. Let us now explore how he becomes her justice. 5. God defends her, and he acts in her silence. The world may never see the full extent of what she endured. The narcissist may never admit what he did. Friends may remain confused. Family may believe his version. But there is one who saw it all. Every silent tear, every time she bit her tongue to keep peace. Every prayer she whispered through gritted teeth. God was in the room when she was lied to. God was present when she was gaslit, disrespected and worn down. And while she held back her fury to protect what little dignity remained in the relationship. He took note, not to forget, but to act. There is a moment in every battle where God tells his daughter to step aside, not because she is weak, but because he is ready to take over. And when a virtuous woman finally releases the need to prove, to fix, or to make the narcissist see what he's done, when she walks away with her peace and lets God be the judge, the war shifts dimensions. It leaves the natural and enters the spiritual. And in that realm, no manipulation works, no fake charm deceives, and no ego can. Because now, the narcissist is not facing her anymore. He is facing the one who called her worthy. God does not always act immediately. Sometimes he waits, not because he tolerates evil, but because he is building testimony. While she was growing in silence, learning to discern healing in secret and rebuilding her identity, God was preparing the justice not just for her healing, but for his glory. Because when God defends, he leaves no doubt who was right and who was lying. He doesn't just restore the woman, he silences the mocker. He doesn't just protect her future, he rewrites her past with new meaning. You see, the narcissist thought she was powerless. He thought because she didn't scream, she didn't see, because she didn't fight, she was weak because she forgave, she could be used again. But what he didn't understand is that her restraint was never for him. It was for God, her self-deter. Her endurance was an act of worship. Her silence was not passivity. It was faith in a higher courtroom, one where no lie survives, no mask endures, and no injustice goes unanswered. And now that she's walked away, not in bitterness, but in freedom, God begins to act, not in the way humans expect, not always with external collapse, though sometimes that happens, but in the way that truly destroys a narcissist: invisible conviction, unshakable isolation, and the crumbling of everything built on deceit. Their new supply doesn't satisfy, their reputation begins to fray. The illusions fall apart, not all at once, but slowly, precisely, divinely. And while that happens, God begins lifting her quietly. At first, a new peace enters her spirit. A new strength returns to her voice. New doors open that don't require performance. New relationships arise that are healthy, God-honoring and true. And most importantly, she feels safe again, not just externally, but in her soul. Because she now knows God was not just watching, he was recording. And now he is responding. This is not karma. This is not luck. This is covenant justice. Because when God puts his hand on a daughter and someone lifts their hand against her, there is always a consequence. Maybe not when she begged for it, maybe not when she was still hoping he'd change, but once she obeyed the call to walk away, and once she surrendered her pain into God's hands, the courtroom of heaven opened, and no lawyer, no lie, no charm, no apology can bribe that judge. So she doesn't need to explain anymore. She doesn't need others to understand. She doesn't need to clear her name. God is doing it. And when he speaks, the whole earth listens. And now we enter the part most narcissists never expect, where all their replacements, performances, and hollow victories begin to feel empty, because the presence she once brought will never return. 6. She doesn't need to be believed, because truth reveals itself. One of the most devastating aspects of surviving narcissistic abuse is not just the betrayal, but the aftermath, the whisper campaigns, the false narratives, the carefully constructed lies that paint her as unstable, dramatic, ungrateful, or even cruel. The narcissist doesn't just want to break her in private. He wants to control how others remember her in public. And because he is charming, persuasive, and practiced in deception, he often succeeds for a time. But the virtuous woman has learned something. Most people don't understand. She doesn't need to be believed to be justified. You see, when you know the truth and you are held by God, you stop fighting to be understood. You stop wasting breath trying to prove what only time and fruit will reveal. She once begged him to see, then she begged others to see. But now she no longer needs to be seen. She is secure in what God saw, and that changes everything. The narcissist depends on controlling perception. That is his currency. His strength lies not in reality, but in appearance. So when she stops defending herself, when she lets people believe what they choose, when she no longer tries to clean up his mess, he becomes unsettled because he knows what he did. He knows what she endured. And while others may not, the most terrifying truth for him is that she knows too, and she hasn't forgotten. She just handed it over to heaven. At first, it looks like he wins. He gets sympathy. He gathers allies. He frames the story. But slowly, something starts to shift. Because lies decay, manipulation exhausts itself, and truth, real truth, does not stay buried. It rises, not with violence, not with fanfare, but with a quiet force that unravels the entire structure of falsehood. What was hidden begins to surface. People start to notice inconsistencies. Patterns emerge, and most of all, they begin to see the difference between the fruit of her life and the fruit of his. She is not perfect, but she is growing. She is healing her peace. Returns, her joy becomes visible. She flourishes even after devastation, and that in itself becomes her vindication. Because while the narcissist continues to orchestrate control, she continues to live, and the contrast grows louder than any rumor. She no longer needs to explain what happened. She becomes the evidence that something holy walked away from something broken. And here's what the narcissist never expected: to be haunted by someone who no longer needs him, no longer speaks of him, and yet whose very wholeness proves that he was not what he claimed to be. She becomes a living contradiction to every story he told, and that contradiction gnaws at him in the quiet. It stalks him when he lies awake. It echoes when his new relationships fail, because he can't outrun what she knows. And worse, he can't outrun what he did not. Anymore, she doesn't celebrate his downfall. She doesn't pray for revenge. She prays for release. But heaven holy, just and patient, never forgets. And when God protects a woman's name, no campaign of slander can erase it. When he clears her path, no lie can block it. And when he says, "I will make your righteousness shine like the dawn," he means it. And he delivers always, so she holds her peace. She no longer justifies. She no longer over-explains. And that peace is not weakness. It is strength, covered in grace. Because she knows God will clear her name in ways she never could. And when he does, there will be no doubt left standing. And now we reach the final, most dangerous truth. Of all, the one that truly ends the narcissist's power. She never became like him. And that's why he could never destroy her. 7. She never became like him, and that's why he could never destroy her. The ultimate test of any battle is not whether you survive it, but whether you remain yourself. In the aftermath, evil doesn't always want to kill you. It wants to convert you to take what was once soft, and make it bitter to take what was once generous, and make it guarded to take what was once rooted in faith, and twist it into vengeance. That's the deeper war narcissists wage, not just to control your present, but to contaminate your identity. And that is where the virtuous woman won. She walked through fire and came out clean. She was lied to, belittled, disrespected, used, discarded, and yet she refused to let any of that define her soul. She may have cried, she may have broken, She may have questioned her own worth for a season, but she never surrendered her goodness. She never traded mercy for malice, and even when it hurt most, she chose to keep her spirit intact. That is what the narcissist cannot understand. That's what he can't stand because he was trying to make her into a mirror of himself. Reactive, spiteful, manipulative, insecure. He wanted to transfer his chaos into her heart, to see if she would become what he is, because that would justify him. But when she refused, when she stayed kind, when she healed with honor, when she left without poison in her mouth, she proved something eternal. He never had the power to redefine her. You see, narcissists don't just fear exposure, they fear irrelevance. They fear that after all the damage, all the mind games, all the control, they still fail to ruin you. And when she walks in, freedom with love in her heart and wisdom in her steps, she becomes the one thing he cannot fabricate, imitate, or destroy whole. And it's not that she's perfect. She's scarred, but her scars are sealed. She's wiser, but not hardened. She's more discerning, but not cynical. Her heart may have been shattered, but God put it back together, not in the same shape, but in a stronger design. One that cannot be breached again by deception. One that sees clearly. One that forgives, but never forgets. Not out of spite, but out of wisdom. That's what terrifies the narcissist most, that even now, even after all the cruelty, he holds no piece of her. She owes him no explanation. She carries no shame. She doesn't tremble at his name. Her life no longer circles around the wreckage he created. She lives forward, not in survival, but in purpose. And nothing could be more devastating to a man who thought he could write her ending because he didn't write it. God did. And in God's version, she was never meant to become like him. She was meant to become more like Christ. That's the final defeat. Not that she screamed, not that she exposed him, but that she kept her soul. That in the war for her identity, she chose righteousness over revenge, healing over hate, and wisdom over wrath. That when the moment came and the path split between bitterness and blessing, she chose the harder road, the higher road, and that road led her here.